talked a lot.
All right. Sorry, you were just saying, after we were just talking about your engagement party.
In May, we attended the wedding of
1963.
no.
No.
So you were married in
Yes,
1963.
right. It's now 1963.
Okay.
And
I had been, let's see, Billy Graham's daughter, Gigi, was engaged to be married to the son of a Swiss, Stefan Tchividjian, who is an Armenian background. And got an invitation. We got an invitation to the wedding because of that connection. And so we actually got to shake hands with this very, very famous person.
Billy Graham.
Billy Graham.
Yes.
So really, but where was it? Where?
In
is it in the palace?
Montreux, the palace. It's a very, very famous
Hotel.
So in
hotel.
Lausanne.
Montreux, which
Oh,
is
okay.
a town along the shore of Lake Léman, or Geneva to other people. And so it's quite, as you know, your mother's very much enjoys these occasions where one hobnobs and has great food and and the bride's dress, which was riding up in the elevators, had popped a button and got to talk to the bridesmaids and got to mingle. Of course, the Schaeffers and Billy Graham were well known to each other. And they had Edith and Ruth Graham had the Chinese background in common. Anyway, the bridesmaids sang "Tiptoe Through the Tulips" at the reception. Now I think
So really,
but it was with everything
That's
laid on.
strange.
It was a very opulent kind of wedding, but to have to meet Billy Graham and have him stretch out in his hand and say, "Billy Graham, seriously?" It's like, send Busker. But anyway, what was your student's name? Stefan?
Stefan
Tchividjian.
Tchividjian.
So they were Armenian. So there's a Armenian thread going back into the past too.
And I think it was on that.
But they went on to have 7 or 8 children, I think, Gigi and Stefan.
Yeah, he trained the psychologist.
but he was at that point. Had he just finished? You said he was a student of yours.
Yeah, he was trained. He was I was preparing him for the English portion of the French baccalaureate exam, which is usually taken at the age of 19 or something like that. So I got to know him quite well.
So were they pretty young? It was not too long after that?
Several years. It was maybe 20, he might have been 22 or 23. They were pretty young.
Yeah, I was going to say this. They were pretty young too.
I did take advantage. I think this was true of this wedding. I have been to several weddings.
Dad enjoys these weddings too, but from a different point of view.
Actually, I'm mixing it up. It was with Ranald Macaulay's wedding. They had these, I wore a Scottish kilt.
Right.
We have a picture.
I know, I've seen that.
Request of Ranald and Edith, probably.
So that was April 6th, he's talking about a wedding that took place April 6th, 1961.
Yeah. Anyway, the kilt came complete with a spine. The spine, it's a sort of a pocket.
Right.
And all these what do you call
Sugared Jordan almonds.
Jordan almonds.
Dad's
yes.
favorite.
I love Jordan almonds.
had a nice convenient pouch, which I went around and
A few out of this dish. And
Is that why Francis Schaeffer thought you were not appropriate?
reservations.
I found out about the stolen Jordan almonds.
So on to, anyway, that was a high point of our engagement. And then we had to decide where would we get married and how would we get to the States. And so really, I don't know if we can get to the wedding during this session because we went back and forth. Just talking about this the other night. If we married in England, you'd have to have the banns read so you had to allow a certain amount of time to, you can't just buzz in and get married. Probably you can, but and so he said, oh well, we'll get married in Switzerland and then we'll travel. Well, first of all, this is really getting ahead of ourselves because we knew that we were going to the States, and Jeremy by this time had, by the intervention of my friend Wendy Hendricks, come to have employment or graduate school, becoming a
teaching fellow,
a teaching assistant
University.
at the University of Pennsylvania History Department as of September. Thanks to Wendy's mom,
who was
Adele Young Hendricks, married to William Hendricks, who was at the U.S. Steel, or was it the other steel company? Anyway,
no, it was a small company, not a major one.
okay. So he was employed in the upper echelons. So through, I think, most of the people who become on the board of trustees of places, there's some money involved. Anyway,
Right.
so Adele and William were bigwigs at the University of Pennsylvania, and very lovely people who had reached out to immigrants in the past, probably after World War II as well. So they knew about the necessity of what happens if you sponsor someone. So they became sponsors to Dad in his immigration, and it was Adele who had got him the place at the University of Pennsylvania on the strength of the fact that Wendy met this girl, Lucinda Van Busker, and her fiance wants to come to the States. And so Dad had to apply for a green card. You had to have, I remember you had to have an X-ray, and you had to have this envelope that you carried around with you as part of your immigration status.
Wow.
Anyway, so I'm being a bit confused, but the steps towards our wedding included having a future to go to. And then once we knew about September, then we were saying, okay, marriage, job. All right, well, we could get married in Switzerland. So we looked into that possibility. But it
was impossible.
Because you had to be okayed by the canton and also apply to the national entity in order to get your wedding license, or maybe the commune.
Yeah, the Swiss are very, very cagey about people entering Switzerland having any legal status. And without going into detail, it would be difficult to do that in the time available, and not to mention the cost. The Swiss sell themselves dearly.
So marriage in Switzerland wouldn't work. How about traveling and then marrying in Watertown, and then going on to Philadelphia for that. And then we realized that Jeremy had to report for pre-academic activities, so that took us back to the middle of August. And so suddenly it's like, oh, but if we get to Watertown, oh no, that's not going to work. So then we said, okay, it'll have to be in England, even though the bands, you can get a special license, so we can arrive in England and get married and then travel together. Okay, that will
So
work.
you'd have to apply to the bishop to not have bands read?
Yeah. Well,
of course, we had some insight.
Marriages in England not only a religious affair, it's also a civil affair. We would be married. Would be married in the church in which my family had an ongoing connection for many, many years.
What church? Say it for our viewing public.
St. Mary's Parish Church, Cheadle, Cheshire, England.
Okay. So everybody wants to go visit.
Cromwell's soldiers slept on the benches in the church on one occasion.
Wow.
But that's another story, which we could tell. But I did want to say to thank the Lord for his provision and guidance, that as of December, we have these plans. We're getting engaged, then we're going to get married at some point, and how's this going to work out? And all of a sudden, Dad, who'd been working for 25 francs a month, realized, but I need money, which his dad had already figured. But anyway, so what could he do? And that's when the job at Beausoleil offered. Because we had gotten to know
The second job.
Nicholas and Patricia
Wolf.
because Patricia and Priscilla Schaefer-Sandry went to the same childbirth class. And so Priscilla had invited the Wolves for Thanksgiving. And thus we met Nicholas and Patricia. And thus when the job came up, they need a teacher at Beausoleil. And
So there's a second stint at
Yeah,
Beausoleil.
right.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, it was after Easter. It was just, I think, 2 or 3 months stint at the most. And I was already known to them at the school, and they had a need, and
a desperate.
they could vouch for me. And so, I returned.
I didn't realize the second stint. But I also wanted to say, vis-a-vis the Lord's provision, you said that Hendricks could sponsor a dad, but my understanding was that he also pulled strings because he was beyond the deadline or close to the deadline and had to be accepted into the program, and they also made that possible, because otherwise he couldn't have been accepted into the
to start
programs
in September.
at that late date.
Yeah.
So that was another
So that was
godsend.
February the 1st was the deadline for applications, and I found out about that after February the 1st. And Mrs. Adele Hendricks, she made some inquiries at Penn, and got advice. The advice was tell him to get recommendations, what do you call them?
Referrals? References?
references.
Well, I think academic, anything which might cause them to be lenient toward me in terms of,
And accepting you late.
right. And she told us that they had a cocktail party coming up, and she would talk to the right people.
Just get me the
Business done.
references.
She in particular, maybe there's some connection here. She spoke to very famous medieval expert on the Crusades, Ken Sutton, and I got all these references. I'd never ever had a reference in my life. But I think I got about 10 or 12. I've still got them.
From Cambridge or from other people?
MGS.
One or two from Cambridge, one or two from MGS.
And
That
this is
would
also,
be Manchester Grammar School.
Yeah, that's right.
this is also the naivety of Dad, that he had the references sent to him, then he opened them and read them, and he put them into an envelope and sent them to Mrs. Hendricks. Like, no, this is...
You're not supposed to even see those.
So I have
be
those.
sealed. You copied them?
No, that she gave them back afterwards.
I'd like
I
to
think.
see those.
Anyway,
I'd be very interested in seeing those.
in cases of comfort to those in following generations, it was said of Jeremy Jackson that while at Cambridge he had not fulfilled his intellectual potential. I think through immaturity, because he graduated when he was 20.
20?
Yeah.
Very young.
So,
You're
yeah.
just so young.
So he must have hit his stride when he was in graduate school after 2 years. You know.
I never took studies seriously before that.
Just did what he had to.
If
Right.
that.
But he had, see, this is what was also slowly developing, because I remember his saying several times that now that he had been at L'Abri, there were aspects of history that he would like to spend time. He would like to spend time in a library. And then, being totally honest, he said, I don't know if I could really enroll as a graduate student, because I don't think I want to do an MA or a PhD. But then he found out the University of Pennsylvania would employ him, so he felt, oh, right, well, as long as I don't owe them to go forward with graduate school,
I can work for my
I work and
learning.
and lo and behold, Dr. Jackson made it anyway.
Yeah, I had no intention of getting a degree. It just sort of happened.
All of a sudden, there you were.
Later on in my life, of course, I was in the position of teaching graduate students, and having graduate students depending upon me. And I realized that every professor is looking out for some bright spark. And I think what happened was I became members of the department who with whom I took courses recognized that I was an interesting candidate,
A likely...
I always remember Dr. Odložilic, who's Czech, and he left Czechoslovakia in 1948, and managed to get out before the communists got in, and had taught at Columbia, and I don't know whether he taught at Princeton, but he was a well-established professor at Penn, and I took a course with him, and he was very, very kind to me. He took me on 1 or 2 walks by the River Schuylkill, and he. 19 he took me under his wing. He said, I know what it's like to be in your situation, because this is how it was for me when I got out of the Czechoslovakia.
But that's going ahead to September 63.
Yeah.
You know, but
Right.
so
Well, I want to hear what he said, because then we're at 20 minutes, so we can just add that nicely. If you could just tell us what he said. And
Yeah,
then,
the only the only outfit that could give me the funding I needed, because I was at this point planning, under the encouragement of another professor, Jim Davis, who you met.
Yep.
I was planning to do research, a dissertation, which would involve more than the usual amounts of money. And there's only one such foundation in America at that time, which would give enough support for me to take my wife and children, who at that point were just about to be 2 children. Yeah, there were only one foundation could do that, and Odler Gillick was happy to give me a reference, academic reference.
Social Science Research Council.
And the outfit involved was the Social Science Research Council, and they would support fully. But Odler Gillick told me afterwards, after the fact, he said, I have written recommendations for many students, and to get money from this particular foundation. And he says, we've never been able to swing it, never been able to get them. But he said, if they refuse you, or maybe he's speaking after the fact, if they had refused you, I would never again have written another recommendation to that foundation. Which is encouraging.
So it's Jim Davis and Odler Gillick who largely mentored Jeremy when he got to Penn. So that's
And there's another professor,
stepping ahead a little bit.
Richard Dunn, Dick Dunn, who's very, very well-known American history, colonial American history professor.
And Robert Cross, you liked him a lot, or he liked you or
Cross,
something.
I don't think I tried to get it. He was a visiting professor from Columbia.
all right. Well, we didn't get to the wedding, but we're at nearly 24 minutes, so
We're
we'll do that the
poised.
next